Good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Zontak. I'm the Cultural Arts Director at the JCC in Buffalo. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is our final event in our Jewish Poetry series. I think we did 5 this series, and they've been all really well received, very successful. We've had amazing lineups, and tonight is definitely no different. 3 wonderful poets lined up for this evening. Before I turn it over to our hosts, Philip Turman and Baruch November, I just would like to ask everybody if you can all just stay muted during the readings, but we encourage you to go ahead and send comments, feedback through the chat. The poets will be able to read those as you go or later on. And also, if you have any questions, you can feel free to send those as they're reading through the chat as well. We will try to leave about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to take some questions. So feel free to send those throughout. And I think that that's probably it for me. I will follow up tomorrow. We are recording this, so I'll be sending out an email to everybody joining us tonight and sharing the link of the recording, so you can feel free to watch it again or share it with friends and family. And then I'll also share links for all of our poets tomorrow too. So now you can just enjoy the evening. I will turn it over to Philip and Baruch. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Baruch, where are you? I can't see you in this. There you are. You're in the other galaxy. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited for tonight. We have wonderful poets for our audience.
It's our last in our series. So thanks so much for joining us. We'll have these 3 wonderful, amazing poets read, and then maybe if you have any questions. So if any occur to you, you can certainly send them to Katie in the chat. And if you have anything, great to say about any poet while they're reading, feel free to share them in the chat. Not too many people do these reactions here, but I kind of like them. Thumbs up, whatever. You can't do that in an actual live reading, so you can do it on Zoom though. So we'll have, as I say, we'll have Rodger read first, and then Alan, and then Jane, and then after we'll have just maybe a few questions, or maybe a short little talk wherever it might go, not too long, because it's a beautiful spring evening, at least where I am. So
please come up with questions. We'd love to have some questions from the audience. We love audience participation, right, Phil?
We do. So, all right. So I'm going to introduce, just to get the ball rolling, I'm going to introduce Rodger, whose books of poetry include A Missing Jew, which he's been working on all his life. Haven't you, Rodger?
Good part.
He's done it over the years, and the most recent just came out within the last year or so. At selected poems from 1976 to 2022. It's an incredible collection, highly recommended, and represents 46 years of Jewish poetry, which is kind of amazing and fantastic. Other books include Yonder and Dream Logic. He also has some of the books on The Missing Jew. I even have his. I thought I was going to bring that. Oh well, I can't find it. But I have his first book somewhere up there. I couldn't find it. Necrolepsy, is that what it's called, Rodger, or something like that? Great book. I've been reading him for a long time.
Nympholepsy.
Is that still in print?
I have a library of 500 copies.
There you go. Okay. All right. Just send him an email.
Yeah, right.
But I just want to say personally that Rodger's writing has been a huge and continues to be a huge influence on me. And I'm going to be very personal about this. As a young Jewish poet, trying to figure out what this Jewishness is all about, attracted to this, not attracted to that, checking out other philosophies and religions and attempting to find ways to live and articulate my own personal brand of Jewishness, I guess. Rodger's books have been and are important companions along the way, drawn as he is to very similar impulses that I've been drawn to. His well-known book, The Jew and the Lotus, fantastic. Everybody probably knows about that. Very famous, and rightfully so. Just blew me away, where he met the Dalai Lama. So we're all 2 steps away from the Dalai Lama right now, 2 peoples away. But it's a fantastic book, and I think it really opened up a lot of people's sense of, Jews can meditate too, and all that, and the scholarship that he uses, that he's looked into and studied in not only that book, but also the next book. I don't know if it's the next book chronologically that really blew me away, was his book about Nachman and Kafka, Burnt Books, which, because I love Nachman and Kafka, I think many of us do. The memoir, sort of a combination memoir, Talmudic study, mystical inquiries, looking at how both writers are, the similarities of both writers. Both writers wanted to have their books burnt, and he brought those together in such a brilliant way. I have these books right, on my close to me on my shelf. But also Stalking Elijah, Adventures with Today's Jewish Mystical Masters, which is another phenomenal book. So that all these books I wish I would have written. Could I have, taking journeys and talking to these mystical people and finding out a little bit more. And this notion of inquiry, curiosity, lyrical mysticism in his work, as well as, of course, he's going to do a poetry reading, but his poetry. I just think he's one of our major figures, both in poetry and in his memoirs that touch on various and important concerns and curiosities that many of us have. And I think he's done an amazing job. And I thank God that he's written, and he will continue to write. Wow. Okay. Not to mention his work on dreams, which I won't even talk about, since I know that's the one book. I said, no, I got to stop. I'm not sure I'm ready to go there, but after our little discussion earlier, maybe I will. So, the New York Times said about Rodger that about the Jew and the Lotus, but I think that's true for all of his work. Chronicles and discoveries of what he says brings nourishment to Judaism, and he certainly brought nourishment to me. Please welcome Rodger Kamenetz.
Thank you, Phil. It was really beautiful, and from the heart, I could feel it. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, I feel really happy to be in this circle organized by Baruch and Phil and Katie as helping it manifest. And I really am honored to be reading with Jane Shore and Alan Shapiro, poets who I greatly admire. And I feel honored to be in their company. So I'm going to start off with a poem about gefilte fish, because I think one of my connections to being Jewish is food. So we'll see what you think of this one. Gefilte. Colorless, odorless, tasteless gefilte fish. Your hooves of brown jelly and ceremonial carrot tremble, as if deciding between being and non-being. In the periodic table, you would be a xenon. I am here, says gefilte fish, and I'm not going anywhere. Take me as I am. Eat me to join a secret club. How I long for your unappetizing gray, fumit goo melting around your waist, your jaunty orange cap sliding askew. A bold dab of horseradish gives you flavor you never earned. Boiled ball of fish flesh and matzah meal, bland succouring the bland. The bubbling stew you emerged from was a witch's cauldron of fish heads. Their dead eyes whirling wildly, you dripped like a Zoftig Venus. Or are you one of the castrated balls of time? Or the chilled brain of a zombie? My fork divides you, my mouth waters. I crave your permanent humility, your humble inadequacy. You accept you will never be beautiful, which is beautiful. Like me, you can only be yourself. Eating you is almost a cannibalism. How soft you are, like baby's food, mother pre-chewed. One taste, and I am me. So let me move from the metaphysics of that to a poem that came out of, kind of when I first started writing. I was given a copy of the Babylonian Talmud, a book that I'd never seen before because I was raised as a Reform Jew, and we didn't hear about that. But actually, it had come from the rabbi's study, and it was a translation by an ex-Chassid convert, and it's written in Victorian English. But somehow something came through that really touched me about the voices of these rabbis, and I can't seem to get rid of them. And they're kind of in me, whether I like it or not. So this one's called The Broken Tablets, and the epigraph is from a section of the Talmud called Menachot 99a, if you're playing at home. And the text is, Rabbi Joseph learnt both the tablets and the fragments of the tablets were deposited in the ark. The broken tablets were also carried in an ark, insofar as they represented everything shattered, everything lost. They were the law of broken things. The leaf torn from the stem in a storm, a cheek touched in fondness once, but now the name forgotten. How they must have rumbled, clattered on the way, even carried so carefully through the wasteland. How they must have rattled around until the pieces broke into pieces, the edges softened, crumbling, dust collected at the bottom of the ark, ghosts of old letters, old laws. Insofar as a law broken is still remembered, these laws were obeyed. And insofar as memory preserves the pattern of broken things, these bits of stone were preserved through many journeys and ruined days, even, they say, into the promised land. Okay, so Jane, we were talking ahead of time, and Jane had mentioned Newark, and I had an Uncle Louis who left the center, Baltimore, and moved up to Newark and had a candy store. And this poem is about Uncle Louis, or why my father moved from Baltimore to Florida. And I guess you can imagine the poem being written in New Orleans in December when your tomato plants are still producing little tomatoes. Okay, so. Just now, my cherry tomato plant, December late afternoon, holds 3 hard green balls on prongs, a pawn shop sign. This late in the year, not enough sun to ripen them. Who pawns what as the zebra caterpillar crawls on the butterfly weed to gnaw a last sweet leaf, leaving the stalk bare as a phone pole on a cold back street in Newark, 20 years gone. There my Uncle Louis, the cheap landlord, tore their porches off when the Puerto Ricans complained they were rotten, and piled up his pennies and nickels into a massive heart attack that scared my father to Florida out of Baltimore's cold winter. That, and the small black mouth of a pistol pointed to the back of his skull as he lay on the drugstore floor with an eyeball on the dirty vinyl. 62 years old, and the addict scooping money and pills from his safe, storehouse of money and controlled substances, of 30 years pacing vinyl past the register and the pill counter, the scale with brass weights he hardly ever used, any more than the scale of nature that balances 3 green tomatoes against December's failing light, green babies that will never ripen or grow. But it wasn't the pistol that sent him packing. My father's brother's death reminded my father of death in a rich and obvious rhyme. And if it's true, the sum of any man's life is 0, that's only in simple math. The years can balance on the tiptoe of a moment in an elephant ballet, weighted with music and destination. But lying on the floor of his pharmacy, facing death, he thought of the police, the alarm, but did not yet think of his life. He was strangely calm in eternity where the emergency took place. He did not go to Yom Kippur, where a big God writes your name in the book of life and seals it with wax. He did not whisper the Shema or say ultimate things. He was so sure, even there on the floor, that he would always live, because it wouldn't be fair to die when he had already sacrificed himself to himself, as if life were an autoimmune disease, or we are driven by a thief to a dead end, sirens screaming, red lights flashing all around. So it was natural to find himself down on his knees, then lying on the floor, natural to feel the cold metal mouth of the gun at his nape, and to see that the floor needed mopping, and to remember the combination of the safe, the perfect trick of numbers, the safe that held the money and the drugs. Who lay on the floor and who held the gun, while judgment hung in the balance? The unused scale held its sad empty pans and grimy brass weights. When he got off the floor and dusted off his pants, the alarm started ringing in his head. After his brother Louis died later that month, he knew it was time for a getaway. He heard one golden word: Florida. And how about the son who mocks, who holds the gun, who lies on the floor, who scoops the powder, who makes the getaway, who is also the cheap brother of the Coldwater flat tearing off the porches, and who is the baby screaming in Spanish when the green paint fell from the demolition in a drizzle of lead and crept into the baby's nostrils and stole the baby's brain? Have I done better? Unripe tomato on a prong, too late for the season? God sits in heaven, writing all these names in a golden book. God is very careful with the spelling, with the writing down, and the sealing wax. God writes a short message after each name. I am tiptoeing up to the table with the golden book and the brass scale, hoping to sneak a peek, hoping I'm included. As if God doesn't see me, as if God doesn't watch the cold green tomato, as if the scales aren't being used every moment, as if God wasn't there with my father on the floor, as if God doesn't know where I stand in the light. Let me check the timing here. Okay. So I think there's just time for one more, and I'll read it. It's a bit longish also, so I thank you for your patience. And this poem is called Allen Ginsberg Forgives Ezra Pound on Behalf of the Jews, which is based on a true story, which is told in the poem, so I don't have to repeat it. But I had met Allen Ginsberg several times in my life, and one time was when I interviewed him when I was writing The Jew and the Lotus. So I think that's referenced here too, which is neither here nor there, I guess. Allen Ginsberg Forgives Ezra Pound on Behalf of the Jews. This is something I was too shy to ask you in that interview. Was it arrogance, your public relations brilliance, some deep desire to heal the split in American poesy, a rascally fuck you to all the rabbis you never loved, the synagogue hens, the shalt nots you burst one by one? Or was it that his cantos gave you a permission to empty your battered mind into the walls of verse, that you felt a kinship and personal debt? You called his work a graph of the American mind, so that whatever was in that mind, Dolmetsch's lute, a fine eye gathering fire, Duccio, Rothschild, and Roosevelt, poured into a cracked vase, bleeding syrup and lie. Obscurities like dust blew across the page, raw jokes, fits of sweetness, Chinese characters, the Doji of Venice, dull history of Adams and Jefferson, ledgers and correspondence. Yeats in his tower, a peacock in the pride of his eye. Irish, black, Yiddish, vaudeville routines, exact details with small significance. Vasco da Gama wore striped pants. And then, rising out of the mutter and ripple of mind, an upturned nipple, bronze in the light Pound saw and made us see, so that you, Allen Ginsberg, the biggest Jew in Poe business, would hunt him down in Venice to plant a kiss on his cheek. He was by then a broken man besieged. "We get hippies," his Olga said. One pitched a tent in the garden. She ran him off with a hose. Journalists rang the bell, announcing they will tell both sides. What do they think we are? Ezra Pound is no pancake. You came in the summer of '67, chanting Hare Krishna outside his window, back from India, Morocco, Japan, another stop on your wisdom journey, Martin Buber, Jerusalem sage, and your first Tibetan teacher, Dudjom Rinpoche. Eyeing your hippie entourage, Olga asked, "Would you like to wash your hands?" But you said, "Do you people need any money?" Olga thought you a big, lovable dog who gives you a great slovenly kiss and gets lots of hair all over you. Dog Jew, hairy Jew, Allen, who sent you? Did you stop first in Rome for Primo Levi's blessing, whose hands trembled in Birkenau? Did you sing Hare Krishna outside Paul Celan's window before he jumped in the Seine? Or say Kaddish for his mother, murdered by men who also had theories about economics and race? Was there a depth of kindness in your public relations? Were you able to hold not only forgiveness, but the knowledge of all that needed forgiving? You met again that fall at the CC restaurant in Venice, you in dark glasses, rich Adamic beard, Pound's thin, aged face, wisps of white hair. Across the table you asked to say more than a few words. You did most of the talking, Pound in his silence and regret. Then pausing in the yakety-yak of your eternal sentences, you asked, "Am I making sense?" To which Pound said, "Yes," and then mumbled, "But my poems don't make sense. Any good I've done has been spoiled by bad intentions." Then very slowly with emphasis, "But the worst mistake I made was that stupid suburban prejudice of anti-Semitism." So Pound half confessed to a bearded Jew, for a Jew he saw in you, not a Buddhist, with the Jewish fire and sweetness and the eagerness to explain. From the time you heard Blake's voice in Harlem, you butt your head against the Hebrew God until Buddha lifted your prophet's mantle when Rinpoche told you, "If you see something horrible, don't cling to it. If you see something beautiful, don't cling to it." You told Pound, "I come to you as a Buddhist Jew." Fair enough. He shouldn't think himself forgiven by the other kind. Or was it Martin Buber who sent you when he told you to forget the voices of angels and demons? Our business is with the human. Pound learned that in the iron cage. You in the asylum, Ceylon knew it but couldn't live with it. Primo Levi knew it but let go of the rope. Whoever sent you, Jew or Tibetan, when Ezra confessed, you forgave. Do you accept my blessing, you said? Pound, I do. But a year later, outside a McDonald's, in our strange American life, Pound shuffled off into the woods. Laughlin found him muttering, "Why don't you just discard me here?" Now in the suburbs of Elysium, Ezra Pound, wander as you will past Big Mac wrappers and a few extra fries, go into the dark woods where Dante roamed, and hear once again the clear, sweet voices that drove you to make a beautiful thing. Or crack your pot against the stone of time. And you, Allen Ginsberg, in the land of 10,000 Buddhas, or in the simple heaven of your mothers and fathers, or raw bone under the earth, tell me, which is it now? If you see something beautiful, don't cling to it. Or is our business with the human, after all? Thank you all.
Thank you, Rodger. I consider myself incredibly lucky to host this series where I get to go from hearing one legendary Jewish poet read his excellent poetry to introducing another legendary Jewish poet for him to read his poetry and to just really just be a part of it, just be a part of it with my strange outer space background. Just to be here, I feel so lucky. And now I'm going to introduce you to Alan Shapiro. Just from looking at any one of his poems, one can see why it has been said Alan Shapiro has been writing the smartest poems in America, and I'd say beyond. Alan has published over 10 books of poetry. He has won the Kingsley Tufts Award. His book, Real Real, was the finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, while his book, Knights of the Republic, was finalist for the National Book Award and the Griffin Prize. I also must tell you that his book, Old War, won the Ambassador Award. Without a doubt, Shapiro deserves endless accolades for his poetry. For his poetry dazzles us again and again. His words never fail to illuminate life on Earth like an X-ray machine or perhaps fireworks. Now, I won't go on any further. I want to just let Alan Shapiro's words do the talking. Alan?
Thank you, Baruch. And I want to reiterate what Rodger said about how appreciative I am to be here and honored to be reading with Rodger and the great James Shore. So the first poem I'm going to read is set in a slaughterhouse, which was run by my father for many years in the 1950s. It's called All Morning. I'm watching my father alive again, younger than I've ever seen him, at the entrance to the slaughterhouse chute among the just washed cattle. With a slender stick in one hand, he lightly taps the hind legs of each cow, calf, or bull who stops there, refusing to go forward, spooked by the clatter of hoof on metal, the occasional more fearful lowing farther down the line, the smell. The tapping, though, is gentle, lighter than a nudge, more like a tender brushing than a tap. And as he does this, he's whispering something in the animal's ear, something maternal, I imagine, soothing, as if he cared for each and every creature he's about to slaughter. And sure enough, with his sweet encouragement, they all go forward, a little less unwarily, the bulls, the cows, the calves. One after another, they continue lumbering down the chute to the stun gun station and the hoist. And even after I'm awake enough to know I'm dreaming, his voice, more melody than voice, more caress than melody, is whispering in my ear to coax me on. I'm going to read a love poem. This is a poem about the falling in love at the unlikely age of 70. And it's for Rachel, my betrothed. And it's called Last Act. The stage lights cancel what's beyond the stage. The house is quiet. Is it full or empty? Is it the quiet of an opening or closing night? And where have they all gone? The ones who've left the stage to us, the ex-showstoppers, scene chewers, the sad hams of self-importance who brought the house down one too many times not to seem tired even to themselves, their villainy almost vaudevillian, the farther off it feels, which must be why nobody bothered leaving the ghost light on for their own ghost to keep declaiming by. Only these faded scuff marks now remain of all that once so often blocked out strutting and fretting. It hardly mattered who played who, the single scene of ever-changing actors coming and going in repeat performances. Yet here we are again, facing each other, imagining that this time could be different, if only because we know how late it is, how limited the run. Despite the old roles waiting in the wings for one last scene to steal, doesn't it feel, for now at least, unscripted, unrehearsed, as if what we have learned by heart could be by heart forgotten if we play it right? I'm going to read two more poems, both a little longer. The first one is called Necessity, and it comes from having been reading a lot of Baruch Spinoza, the 17th century philosopher, Jewish of origin, though he was not what you would call a believing Jew. The one term, there's a term from the Kabbalah that's Ein Sof, which means the without end, what was there before there was anything, and it means without end. And the poem is called Necessity, and it's in different parts. I'll just pause between the parts. So, Necessity. Now that I'm over 70, it occurs to me that for the first time in my lifetime, most of the dogs born today on Earth will probably outlive me. The thought of houseflies, on the other hand, still has the power to make me feel, if not quite hopeful, then a bit less mortal. Although, what does it say about a life when all that keeps it from relinquishing all hope is thinking, well, at least I'm not a fly. When I was 16 on a Friday night, I stood before the mirror on my locked door, the mirror that showed the body which the sheen of shark skin bells and black shit kickers summoned into being, a body taller than I was, and so exactly what I wanted to be seen as that it never once occurred to me the friends I dressed for must have looked good too, behind their own locked doors, in threads like these, doing a little now no longer spastic boogie-woogie that the same friends soon would hopelessly admire because they weren't and never would be what we each were, if only to ourselves, just then, just there. Then the night began, the street, the milling aimlessly on corners, even while it seemed like we were being moved by unseen hands, sorting us out expertly for selections out of our control, yet somehow in us too, and all around us, like the heat we breathed in thick as spit, as thread by thread the bell sagged and the shirts dampened, and all the mirrors in our bedrooms waited like spurned lovers, enraged, yet cool and patient, knowing we'd be home soon. Where else was there to go? Where else to find what from now on they wouldn't deign to show us? You happy now? What did you expect? What were you thinking? You ruined everything. That mangy stray dog crouched down cowering in a leafless covert at the field's edge in freezing rain, too fearful to come out of hiding, half starved yet shrinking back and snarling at the bread I held, the bread he craved, as if whatever might have saved or soothed him, even my softest voice, come on, sweetheart, it's okay now, come on, were being reconfigured by an old, still ramifying terror into taunt or trick that might have felt much crueler, more dangerous for seeming otherwise. As a diversion from his abstruse investigations into the icy system of logical entailments that was, in his view, the infinite universe our finite minds are able to intuit only the tiniest bits of. Sometimes Spinoza would place two spiders on his writing table so he could, like the God he didn't think existed, watch his chosen ones go at it. And other times, this soberest and most rational of thinkers would throw still living flies into their trembling webs and burst out laughing at the ensuing battle, whose outcome he, like Yahweh, could infallibly foresee. Are we, as he believed, so unfree, so snared in tangling understories of effects whose causes are themselves effects of deeper causes, reaching back down to some Kabbalistic Ein Sof without end, that the mind is mostly helpless as a stone flung through the air, believing while it moves, it's moving freely, willing emotion set in motion by some unsuspected thing that also thinks or doesn't. Like the way my parents did and didn't know their life together had been held together by the wish they'd married anybody else, but who they nonetheless chose never to leave, never imagining, once both had died, how all their unrememberable wrongs and humiliations would flash out again, disguised as whoever it was I happened to be clinging to just then, or bolting from, flinging me from one marriage to another. Yet, in the foreground of your drawing of a beach, you catch a small child under a floppy hat, dancing in mid-spin, arms out like a bird or airplane banking, or some other thing dancing or flying that only he imagines, so wholly given over to the torque that turns him that he doesn't notice how or doesn't care he's trampling a castle his older brother might have spent the morning carefully constructing. Nor does he care none of the background figures watch him, not the father pulling something from a bag, not the bikinied mother leaning over a girl who, like an adolescent, whether she is or not, now looks away and down, holding a beach towel neck to toe around herself too tightly, as if dejected or embarrassed by what her mother might be saying, or by the thought that any bit of her is being looked at, while a kneeling boy, the same one maybe, who had built the castle the dancer is trampling back to sand, just goes on building, 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 unaware of anything beyond his busy hands. Now, here we go. And now the last poem I'm going to read, it's in numbered parts, and it's called Phantom Limb. And it's just a bunch of riffing on the idea of a phantom limb and, treating the mind itself like a phantom limb. So phantom limb. So I think that's all you need to know. Oh, and the Sammy who's mentioned in one part is my dog, or my late dog, Sammy. So phantom limb 1. After he'd lost an arm in the Battle of Tenerife, Lord Nelson used to claim he'd thereby proven the afterlife exists. If my arm can have a ghost, he liked to say, so can the rest of me. Which makes me wonder would he have even known the limb was missing if he'd been blinded too? 2. What thinks this is a kind of phantom limb. It feels but can't be felt. It can't be seen or touched, weighs nothing, and it's somehow bound to, while it isn't anywhere exactly in, this chemical electro froth of focus on absences that make it what it is. 3. She haunted the room she lived in while she lived in it. And now my haunting of it makes it more alive than anywhere I've lived. From the arm of the armchair hangs a frayed sack filled with TV guides, scissors, pencils, checkbook, beside which, on the side table, next to a saucer of charred stubs, the lid of a pack of Winstons is flipped back like an open casket on a last smoke, always within reach, and closer a can of Tab, and closer still the ruby-tinted bowl of hard candy that like a magic bowl grows fuller the more she takes from it, to keep me up late with her, even on school nights, in the windowless cell of a bedroom that was living room for her, and day and night room too, and site of trespass and indulgence I'm never blamed for, since she's the adult. She should know better. Over the throne-like chair, a cone of lamplight dims as it seeps down through smoke bands blued by the black and white light of the late-night TV talk show, drowning out the never-ending pox she's calling down on everybody's miserable head but mine. I'm just like her, she tells me, not like them. 2 peas in a pod, the 2 of us, while she offers me another and still another righteous sucker whose red and white stripes glitter like miniature pinwheels, every one of which I still hear saying, take, eat. No need to notice what you don't yet feel. Let the snow of cellophane that falls through ash and smoke lie crumpled, sheenless at our feet. Sonny boy, it's all hard candy in your mouth tonight. Taste it growing sweeter as it shrinks. Suck on that. 4. After the brain surgery, the left side of my brother's field of vision, which is to say, the left side of the world, had disappeared so thoroughly. It wasn't like the left side had just gone black, or like he saw just black when he would look left, but that there was no concept of a left in his brain. So in a sense, nothing for him had ever really changed. He couldn't miss what he didn't know was missing, even though if you were standing off to his left and spoke to him, he'd have to turn right and keep turning in a slow, spasmodic, stumbling pirouette till you appeared. 5, always when I'm reading and it's time to take him out, Sammy will sit directly in front of me and stare so quietly with such complete and utter concentration that the staring is itself a force his eyes give off, a force I swear I can feel firing across the gap between us as between one synapse and another. And suddenly it's like I've wakened from a sleepwalk to discover I've put down the book, and at the door I'm fumbling with the leash as if unsure which end of it is mine. 6. If just now, as I stepped downstairs, there hadn't been one less stare than my brain believed there was, there would have been no too sudden floor to startle me and stumble over into writing this. 7. There was this blessed side effect of the oxygen starvation Tim's brain experienced on his last day, which somehow filled him with this euphoric sense of being fast at work, composing what he called an ode he thought it best not to recite to us until he'd gotten it right. So there he lay, eyes shut, face smiling beatifically, as if the luscious cluster of the vine upon his tongue did crush the wine, the while he waved the baton of a finger to the music he now only had to listen to make, before the terminal restlessness and sweat and chills came on so fast that only the slightest trace of terror pried his blank eyes open, as if to ask us what we thought. 8, and this is a reference to the Aeschylus, to the Agamemnon. 8. I'm like the watchman on the palace roof, dog-tired, sleepless, terrified to sleep, certain this can't end well, uncertain how. I'm just like him, or would be, if he had an inkling that the roof he's lying on, night after night for 10 years, now to pause, is in an old play, based on an older story, only written down some centuries after having been a song anonymous singers known as Homer sang about a war fought even centuries earlier, if at all. A phantom watchfulness, uneasy and foreboding, made entirely of words across a page that's always being turned. 9. On the last day, having been asleep for days, it wasn't that Beth woke and started singing Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, but that she started singing in her sleep, eyes shut, voice phlegmy, almost underwater, the song unconscious as a heartbeat or digestion, or the cold sweat she started sweating when the breathing and the singing stopped. 10. And if it's true, the brain unconsciously projects a schema of the body all around the body, doing what we do before we do it. So the present is already nanoseconds in the past, and the future is just a holographic deja vu we think we actually live through. Does that make anything at all about that last day's final moment more unreal, when all she wanted was a little water, even though by then she couldn't swallow, being by then too weak, too dry to swallow? And if it had been just a simulation, would that have made a difference to the way our vexed, contentious history of misalignments dwindled to the sponge end of a swab I oh so gently brushed her lips, her tongue with, just enough to give her a last sensation of relief, if not quite pleasure? Or how my gentleness so caught me unawares, I wasn't sure I heard her saying, thank you, till the scene, long after she was dead and buried, had played itself back so often I could hear whatever it was back then I might have missed. 11. I don't remember what it was I said that made Bob think of this on that last night we didn't know would be our last. But now, as he exhales and the smoke rings rise and wobble as they disperse, he's telling me about a dream of Emerson's in which he's floating at will in the great ether, seeing Earth far enough away to be no bigger than an apple, and how an angel takes the apple in his hand and brings it to him, saying, this thou must eat. And so, Emerson says, I ate the world. Bob calls it a re-envisioning of the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, to a kind of globalized communion wafer. Then he says, pretty to think so, isn't it? And laughs in disbelief or longing. I can't tell which. And so I ask him what Emerson would have made of the new cosmology, of quantum fields, the multiverse, string theory. Oh, he says, exhaling slowly, sadly, I think, as if the smoke were the thought itself, thinning away from us. He'd have embraced the notion of everything as nothing more than strings that tremble in a giant web. I try envisioning that web, but all I see nearby, half in, half out beyond the porch light, is how the end branch, which a bird has flown from, is trembling for a moment until it doesn't, with the force of what's no longer there. And 12, and this is the last section. The way the old inch out into the water, bent over, flicking such little handfuls of chill against the jiggling rolls and swags of arm and belly fat, you'd almost think they're trying not to make the cold less cold, but to make the shock of it less longer. Just so, I'm wading out into an alien element on the impossible to pinpoint shifting margin of it as it ebbs and flows, where every day another wave whelms up and crashes over, leaving in its wake a shocked awareness of a deepening cold only the dead are used to. Not getting used to it is how I know I'm here. Thank you all.
Wow. Is that sounds new, and is it unpublished yet? Is it in a book? Where is that poem?
It's unpublished. It's in a book that's coming out in the fall, called By and By, that Waywiser Press in England is publishing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
All things are new, are unpublished.
Wow.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. That it was incredible. And we've heard some long poems tonight, and it's just been great. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much there, and very moving. Appreciate it. And it's amazing, Rodger, that you read that Ginsberg Pound poem. I've been read it many times. It's just a great poem. Thank you for reading that, and thank you both. So I know we've been praising our poets tonight to the skies, but they're all worth it and beyond, as is our next poet, Jane Shore, who's all three of these poets seem to have written for about 45 years each, which is kind of an amazing legacy, and it's an honor to be listening. Jane Shore is the author of 6 books, many of which have received awards. Her first, Eye Level, was the winner of the Juniper Prize back in 1977. Then The Minute Hand was the winner of the prize they give to the best second book, the Lamont Prize. Not to be outdone, her next book in 1996, Music -1, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Award. Happy Family came out in 1999. A Yes or No Answer came out in 2008 and won the Poets Prize. And her most recent book, That Said, New and Select, I love that title, That Said, New and Selected Poems, came out in 2012. She's still a professor at George Washington University, I think. That's wonderful. And I'm going to quote someone who's actually among us, Laurie Goldenson, right? Who wrote back in 1997 about Jane Shore in the mid-60s, right? And I have to get this right because Laurie's here. Recalling back when Jane was a student in the late 60s, said it was always clear to Jane that poetry written in solitude is still an act of live community making, community in the widest sense. The persona in even the first of her poems stretched in time from the soldier poet Archelaus, I'm going to mispronounce this, Archelaus, halted in an archaic olive grove to a future vision of herself wheeling a shopping cart in some suburban community. I love that. Thank you for writing that. And then 40 or some years later, after all these wonderful books, writing about her new and selected poems, a poet I respect greatly, Stanley Plumley, said that she wrote that her poems of these past 3.5 decades speak through a Talmudic knowledge as ancient as the archetype. Her work is deep because it's in small worlds becomes so whole, exacting, and inclusive. So that's a wonderful time in practicing and perfecting the art of poetry. I love so much about Jane's poetry. Her poems teach me, like Elizabeth Bishop's and others, how to see. Her brilliant observational skills, combined with her wild and witty intelligence and incredible range of subject matter, the way in which the familiar becomes absolutely unfamiliar, or as Julia Alvarez stated, Jane Shore is the poet of little ambushes, moments that hold us hostage, moments that we come to life, that makes us come to life. A typical example of these lines is from her poem, A Yes or No Answer. I'm just going to quote 4 lines. Are we still a dog and pony show? Shall we change partners and do-si-do? Are you planning on the old heave-ho? Check an answer, yes or no. So I thought I'd try that. And I wrote, Jane Shore, she's a real pro at writing books of poetry. Should we give her a go? Please say yes. Don't say no. Welcome, Jane Shore.
Thank you so much. Can I add that to my book, to that poem?
You got it.
All right. I'll take it.
Honor.
I'll take it. Thank you, Phil, for that lovely introduction, and to Baruch and to Katie for inviting me to read. And the idea of being able to like actually read Jewish poems, like intentionally, and to hear them too, to hear these wonderful Jewish poems, has been amazing tonight for me. I wanted to say also that it's been worth waiting. I don't think Alan and I have ever read together, and Rodger and I never have. So it's worth waiting all these years to read with the two of you. And thank you everybody for inviting me for tonight. So I'm going to read 4 poems, and they're all Jewish. The first one, I have to find a good place to do it, is the Blue Address book. I'm at the age now where now I'm trying to get rid of stuff, whereas 30 years ago, I was trying to get rid of my parents' stuff. And now there's such a big rush to get rid of brown furniture. I think it's amazing. What do we hold on to, and what do we give away? What do we donate, throw away, or pass on to our children? I'm going to read a poem called The Blue Address Book, and it probably will be familiar to most of you here. The Blue Address Book. Like the other useless things I can't bear to get rid of, her nylon nightgowns, his gold-plated cufflinks, his wooden shoe trees in a size no one I know can use. I'm stuck with their blue pleather address book. It's 26 chapters printed in ballpoint pen, X'd out, penciled in, and after she passed away, amended in his hand. Recording as in a family Bible, those generations born, married, and since relocated to their graves. Abramowitz to Zimmerman. Great uncles, aunts, cousins once removed, whose cheeks I kissed, whose food I ate, are in this book still alive, immortal, each name accompanied by a face. Fogel, Rosen Murray, 474 13th Street, Brooklyn, moved to a condo in Boca Raton. Stein, Minnie, sister of Rose, left her Jerome Avenue walk-up for the Yonkers Jewish nursing home. The baby blue cover has a patina of grease. The pages steeped in cigarette smoke from years spent in my parents' junk drawer. Those scattered in different graveyards, here they're all accounted for. Their souls disperse, dust motes in the air that I inhale. I was very excited when I heard Rodger read his gefilte fish poem, and I have a lot of poems about food, and I thought that that I would read. This poem is called Shit Soup. It's another food, and the story that is that I was reading Ruth Reichel's wonderful Tender at the Bone, one of the most wonderful memoirs, and she talked about a dish that her mother made. I think she called it everything casserole, but I think every family has this recipe. My mother called it shit soup. I grew up in New Jersey, so it was, you heard the word shit a lot. But here we go, shit soup. Other mothers have their everything stew, icebox ragu, kitchen sink casserole. Mine had shit soup, a recipe she told me standing in her kitchen in New Jersey. Find a big pot, the biggest pot you have. Shit a quarter chicken into the pot. If you have an old carcass lying around, shit it in. Add 3 quarts of cold water and salt and bring to a boil. Skim off the foam as it collects on the surface. Slice 1 large or 2 medium onions. Shit them in. Shit in some dill and parsley. Dried is okay, but fresh tastes better. Cut into bite-sized pieces some carrots, a couple celery stalks. Shit them in. Those lousy-looking zucchini squash, withered wedges of cabbage, puckered peas. In other words, anything in the fridge. If you have fresh or frozen string beans, shit them in. Shit in a few potatoes. Peel the skin, dig out the eyes, cut off the bad parts, and shit them in anyway. They're filled with vitamins and minerals. Friday's leftovers, oh, what the hell, shit them in. Shit in 12 black peppercorns. Want to know my secret ingredient? 1 ripe tomato makes the broth taste sweet. What's under that aluminum foil? Shit it in. A little mold won't kill you. My recipe, I don't measure. I just shit a little of this in, a little of that. Your mama's shit soup, enough for a week. With a pot of this, you'll never go hungry. Shit in. There wasn't time for me to go to the ShopRite and buy steaks to broil for your fathers and your dinner. Shit in. I'd like to sell the store someday and move to Florida. Shit in the recession, the Second World War, the Great Depression. Shit in. There's no rest for the weary. Shit in her bunions, her itchy skin. Shit in. Rich or poor, it's nice to have money. Shit in. Marriage isn't made in heaven. Shit in. The Republicans. Shit in her tumor. Shit in where it spread to her liver like grains of rice, the doctor said. Shit in her daughters at the cemetery, crying over the hole when they lowered her in. Shit in 1 last handful of dirt. Cover the pot and reduce heat to low. Simmer on the lowest possible flame for 2 hours or until vegetables are fork tender, meat falls off the bone. I wanted to just tell you that I gave this poem to Hannah Block, because she knew Hebrew and Yiddish, and she said, I don't know if this is going to ruin this poem for you, Jane, but she said, you know that in Yiddish, shit arain means to throw into. And so here I thought that my mother was just being crude, but in fact, she was punning in 2 languages. So this was very good news for me. Okay. I'm going to read one more poem about another poem about, I guess it's about food. And I think this relates to several of the poems that have been read tonight. When I just mentioned about getting rid of brown furniture. So, you know, my sister and I, this poem is for my sister. It's addressing my sister. And, you know, we can't wait to get rid of all the stuff. My sister sold their sterling silver because, I mean, like, why not? And it was called Grand Baroque. So of course, very fancy. But I'm going to just read this, and it has to, well, you'll hear it. There's New Jersey in it too. Mom's Grand Baroque. You sold our mother's sterling silver to pay off your credit card in full. It's yours to sell. I don't blame you for unloading the entire set online, plus the mahogany chest it came in. I don't covet that 12-piece service for 12, or have time to polish useless butter knives and fish knives, or the dozen extra teaspoons which, waiting for dessert, we'd balance on our noses for effect. Those cascading roses and pillars and acanthus crowns are too formal for potlucks. After the meal, scraping dirty plates, We'd count the silver, and if we came up short, we'd search the trash can for the fork buried in an avalanche of mashed potatoes. Grateful will be the family that will replace their missing soup spoon with a spoon of ours that we'd start polishing a week before Passover and Thanksgiving, each place setting a gleaming parenthesis flanking Mom's bone china, which I haven't sold, not yet. Those dozen soup bowls, dozen saucers, a dozen of us, no more, no less, mobbed our crowded table covered by a starched tablecloth that practically cracked when Mom unfolded it. Remember how, after having made the pilgrimage to our apartment, having traipsed through 5 boroughs to the Garden State, how uncles and aunts carried on about the Republicans while Dad, our stoic patriarch, guarded the steaming roast or fowl? With mouths full, they'd argued a point until it bled. Those voices are quiet for all time. As Job discovered, not everything you lose can be replaced. Twice a year, Mom's grand baroque imparted class to our ragtag family. Sister, don't feel guilty. Like the 12 tribes of Israel, let them be divided. Let them cross the Hudson River and pass through exotic zip codes. Let them make their separate ways around the world and enter the mouths of strangers. Okay, I'm going to end with a longer poem. This is when I discovered how wonderful it could be to work on a poem that had a sequence. Like when I heard the song Who Knows One at the Seder, I thought I would love to get my hands on that. And so I started working on it, and I started, making lists of numbers, making lists of idioms, doing all kinds of things in order to assemble the poem. And as I was and it started out pretty straight, doing what the Who Knows One song does, which is going through the different Jewish rites and how the numbers affect them. And but mine became very dark. Another poem started to emerge, and I found that one more interesting to work on. So here's my Who Knows One, and I have to say it was quite a lot of fun to work on. And so Who Knows One? Who knows one? I know one. One is God, for God is one, the only one in heaven and on earth. Who knows two? I know two. Two are the first two, Adam and Eve. One is God, for God is one. It takes one to know one. Who knows three? I know three. Bad things always come in threes. 2 trees grew in the Garden of Eden. One is God, for God is one. One rotten apple spoils the barrel. Who knows 4? I know 4. What were you doing on all 4s? 3's the hearts in a menage a trois. 2's the jump ropes in double Dutch. One is God, for God is one. One good turn deserves another. Who knows 5? I know 5. 5 is the 5 in Slaughterhouse 5. 4 is Egypt's plague of flies. 3, the Stooges on TV. 2, the two-faced lie he told. One is God, for God is one. One hand washes the other. Who knows 6? I know 6. 6 are the wives of Henry VIII. Who, what, when, where, why. 4 the phases of the moon. 3 the bones inside the ear. 2 eyes, the better to see you with, my dear. One is God, for God is one. There's only one to a customer. Who knows 7? I know 7. 7, the year of the 7-year itch. 6, the paper anniversary. Asked if he did it, he pleaded the 5th. 4 are my absent wisdom teeth. 3 is the 3 in the 3rd degree. 2 can play that game. 1 is God, for God is one. Public enemy, number 1. Who knows 8? I know 8. The Beatles, 8 days a week. Wrath is the 7th of the deadly sins. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. He lost it all in 5-card stud. 4 bits and a nibble equals half a bite. 3 is the beginning, middle, and end. 2 are the graves in the family plot. 1 is God, for God is one, the only one in a hole in one. Who knows 9? I know 9. 9 are the lives of an average cat. 8 is the day of circumcision. 7, the locks on Samson's head. 6, the sense I wish I had. 5, the 5 and nickeled and dimed. 4 cold feet in the double bed. 3's a crowd. 2's company. 1 is God, for God is one, the only one in a one-night stand. Who knows 10? I know 10. I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. She dressed to the 9s, Fellini's 8.5. 7 the times the bride circles the groom. 6 the number perfect in itself. She daubed her wrists with Chanel number 5. 4 is just, love is just a 4-letter word. 3 is as phony as a $3 bill. 2 is the 2 in double talk. 1 is God, for God is one. There's one born every minute. Who knows 11? I know 11. 11 are the stars in Joseph's dream. 10 is the Roman numeral X. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Infinity's a sideways figure 8. 7 long years Jacob had to wait. 6 is the lover's tarot card. 5 is indivisible. 4, cruel April. 3 witches in the Scottish play. 2 is the 2 in I and thou. 1 is God, for God is one. 1 in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. Who knows 12? I know 12. 12 are the face cards in a deck. 11 are the thieves in Ocean's 11. Take a deep breath and count to 10. It takes 9 tailors to make a man. 8 are the people on Noah's Ark. 7 are the hues in a rainbow's arc. 6 is, I can't remember what. 5, the rivers of the underworld. 4, the rivers of paradise. 3 on a match. It takes 2 to tango. 1 is God, for God is one. In one ear and out the other. Who knows 13? I know 13. 13 is the skyscraper's missing floor. 12 are the men who walked on the moon. At the 11th hour, his life was spared. Do not covet your neighbor's ass. 9 are the circles of Dante's hell. 8 is the game of crazy eights. The phone was busy 24/7. They deep sixed their love affair. The 5 o'clock shadow on your face. 4 is putting 2 and 2 together. 2 second fiddle. 2 minus 1 equals 1. 1 is 1 all alone. You were my one and only one. The only one whose number's up. Finished.
Wow. Quite the poem. I also want to thank you for reading Shih Tzu, by the way.
Thank you very much. The poem was a lot of fun to write. It was a lot of fun to write.
And my mother always said, she used a lot of Yiddish, and she'd always say, well, you just shit it in. I'm thinking, are you swearing? You know? and then she said it all the time. So I was brought back to that. Thank you.
I loved four is on all fours. That was great.
I love 6. I can't remember what it was. Is there a name for that form?
It's the song.
It's Passover.
Who knows one?
Yeah, it's the
no.
Ichad Mi Yodea.
And so, right.
And it's like I was reading in the New York Times had a mathematician writing maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago about poetry and mathematics, and she referenced the Who Knows One, not mine, but the form, and also Green Grow the Rushes O, all the ones where you count down, and it was just really, it's fun, scary.
That repetition, that Dayenu song also has a kind of repetition of that nature at the end.
I wish I could write one. Have any of you guys written one with Dayenu in it?
No, but
I wrote a poem with the end the angel beat the one about Kad Gadya. Yeah.
I love that.
I stuck that in a poem called Seder for the Wicked Son. So
Passover has some of the best songs of all the Jewish holidays, I think.
Right. And they're not that old, actually. I was reading about this at Passover. They were sort of added on later, but they're not as old as we think.
Yeah,
they're probably old, but not that old.
They're not that old.
They're not as old as we are.
Who knows? One.
That's what I love about, the whole Jewish rituals, they're so, you spin poems, you can get poems spun out of them, so much, like Muriel Rokeyser said, being Jewish is a blessing or some kind of a gift. It's a gift because we inherit all that material. What a gift. Were there any questions that anybody, or any comments, or any? Norman, I think you're muted, Norman. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you all. Quite wonderful. And the question I was going to ask, and we seem to be moving towards an answer apropos of Jane's last wonderful poem, is most of the poems that I heard this evening, first person, certain degree of nostalgia, and thematically Jewish, of course, in all sorts of different ways. But one of the questions I was wondering about, and I've wondered about this a long time, has to do with Jewish form and Jewish language, and what distinguishes a Jewish or a Jewish American poem in that regard. And I think that last poem, the one that Jane's last poem, is moving us towards an answer. But I wonder if any of the poets could speak more specifically to that.
Well, obviously, I know Robert Duncan said to me once that the Jews are one of the peoples of the poem. And I think one of his criteria is that whether you had a specific, culturally specific name for the poet, like the Irish have the bard. And of course, one tradition is we have the Navi, so we have the prophet. And I think prophetic poetry would be a uniquely Jewish form. I think, although some of its greatest practitioners like Blake probably, well, we can talk about Blake, but
or Milton.
Yeah. Then the Psalm, obviously, the personal conversation with God, the chutzpah to talk to God, we didn't have poems of that tonight, but well, except maybe Alan's in some ways were thinking about it. I think whenever we come close to death, we want to talk to God. And I'll let Alan comment on that, but I sense that a little bit in some of his poems. And then what I would call midrash and auto-midrash. I think midrash I propose as a poetic trope or movement, unique, strongly Jewish, because we have such a special relationship to text, and we developed this method for responding poetically. There's a statement by Rashi in the very first comment on Bereshit. He says, this text calls out, cries out to be read poetically. Or I've also seen it translated more simply as to be read midrashically, but the point is the same, that that there's something for us in these texts we still have a relationship to, and when we riff on them, Alan used that term and I think that's correct, when we riff on Jewish texts, we're doing a Jewish poetic move that I would classify as midrashic and uniquely Jewish. So those are three examples of what I would call intrinsic Jewish poetry, as opposed to, I think, what you're referencing, which would be also quite rich, the taste of food and our relationship to our past and to a lost world. That I think there may be a specific poignancy to that, given that if you go one further generation back to our grandparents, their world literally was erased. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't call it nostalgia so much as a recovery operation to pull together what, after all, could be taken away or was taken away. And I think
it's also very much a post-immigrant poem too.
Exactly. That's what I mean. But I think the poignancy is behind the immigration, at least in my case. I don't know, maybe others got here a lot earlier, but my grandparents were the immigrants. So behind that is the Europe they left behind was destroyed. So maybe there's something even to, I mean, I love the artifact that Jane was referencing of the pleather address book. Again, like the name, these are the names. I mean, that's a very classic Jewish move to say the names, recite the names. And so she did it, I don't know how she got to that poem, but I mean, the point is that it is a very Jewish move to list the names in that way. And I felt that in that poem. I hope I answered. I mean, what I think you're after.
No, I think you covered a lot of ground. That's terrific, Rodger. Thank you.
Yeah. Just like what is intrinsically Jewish as opposed to the outer Jewish. Obviously I threw in a lot of yarmulkes and whatever. That's a different kind of Jewish poem.
Right. And that's a poem that I think all sorts of minority groups, ethnic groups could write. But I'm much more thinking about the Jewish bones of the poem, as it were.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I don't really have an answer to that question. I stayed back 3 years in a row in Hebrew school, so I didn't do very. I didn't excel in Hebrew studies, and I think that for me, most of my the work has been informed more by English poetry, American poetry and English poetry, than it is by Jewish poetry. There are cultural influences for sure. Humor is an important element, and also a certain kind of worldview. That joke about the difference between the Jewish optimist and the Jewish pessimist. The Jewish pessimist says things can't get any worse, and the Jewish optimist says, "Oh, yes, they can." That view of things has certainly influenced me, but I can't say I hated going to synagogue when I was a kid, and even now I'm not what you would call a practicing Jew. But it's sort of like, it's neither something I'm, it's not something I'm either ashamed of or proud of. It's just something that I am. It's like my shadow, it's like, or my spleen or my pancreas. I was born with it. I didn't, and so, but beyond that, I don't know, sometimes Yiddish inflections would influence me. You know, you grew up hearing people say things like, oh, from having too many customers, he didn't go out of business. You know, that kind of Germanic syntax has a huge influence. And maybe that also sensitized me to just syntax in general and the shape of the sentence, you know, and using the shape of the sentence as a way to enact the shape of feeling or the shape of perception or thought, so that the unfolding of it is as much a part of the form as anything else. And that might have come from just, you know, hearing hearing Yiddish, growing up hearing Yiddish, and hearing Yiddishisms in the English that I grew up with. So, you know.
Alan, I was interested in your mentioning of the Ein Sof, without end. And
Yeah.
I was wondering, have you studied Kabbalah at all?
No,
or
no.
Where did you come upon that?
I just came upon it through Gershom Scholem's, through the centuries of Jewish mysticism, and reading reading about Spinoza, and being interested in him, a lot in him, mainly because of his being, you know, excommunicated from the Jews of Amsterdam. And he's real interesting. He's someone I feel kinship to, oddly enough, and his alienation from Judaism, and yet the way his work continues to be, you know, informed by you know, reasoning, you know, with the Midrash, all about reasoning and analyzing and arguing over things. So,
Alan, your joke reminded me of the Kafka joke of, you know, there's hope, but not for us, kind of thing.
yeah.
And even though Kafka, as we all know, never mentioned Jew in his writings, he does in his journals and his diaries, and Gershom Scholem said that there's a Kabbalah, Kafka Kabbalah kind of thing, wrote a Kabbalah or wanted to. So that's interesting that I saw a parallel between what you were saying and actually in Kafka, but he was very Jewish. You know, he was attracted to Jewish theater. He was, you know, he wanted to move to Israel and all that, but there's that ambiguity, and I think that ambivalence, or the ambivalence, seems Jewish to me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So Kafka gave a lecture. I used to teach in Prague at Prague summer program, and I once gave a talk there. And Kafka gave a lecture there in defense of Yiddish, which was very embarrassing to his parents, who spoke Prague German. And you have to understand that Prague was, Jews were beginning to come from the East, and they had the beards, and they looked, and the hats and everything, kind of like Baruch, right? But even more so. And they were torn between their embarrassment, like, oh my God, these Ostjuden were going to embarrass us, and the fact their hearts saying we have to help these people. And Kafka was certainly in the midst of that, and was reading Buber's Tales of the Hasidim and his translations, we think of I believe of Nachman. There's also a story that a friend of his who converted to Hasidism and came back and told him all these stories about his parents rejected him. That's the basis for the Metamorphosis.
Yeah.
It's really about a Jew who, someone who seems to be a secular, okay Jew, and then suddenly turns into a Chassid, and how he would be looked at by other Jews. So I don't know if that's one theory of the origin of that story.
There's a story, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but somewhat near the end of his life, he fell in love with a girl who was the daughter of a Hasidic Rebbe, the Gera of the Gera Hasidim, and he really wanted to marry her, and he actually really wanted to be involved in this type of Hasidic thought, and that he was willing to live a Hasidic life, and he wrote a long letter to the Gera Hasid rabbi, and the rabbi answered his letter with a one-word letter of no, and that destroyed Kafka, supposedly.
Well, he did have an end. He was with a wonderful woman at the end in Berlin, and they practiced Hebrew, and he pretended to be a waiter, and he would serve meals to her, and it was really kind of charming, beautiful, but his illness cut that off. And he was learning Hebrew at the end, and intended to emigrate to at that time, Palestine. So there's a lot more Jewish to Kafka than I mean, and then to go more to Norman's question, Kafka writes parable and parables within parables. I mean, the trial is a parable that's made of parables. And of course, within it is Before the Law, which is a classic parable, very much in the form of both a Hasidic and rabbinic parable. So again, if we're looking for the intrinsic, and it could be conscious or unconscious, but it was clearly, he knew it. He knew this tradition. He forwards it. You could put it that way. I mean, he brings it forward into modernity, the whole idea of writing in the parable. So, and that's also a Jewish form. I didn't mention it before, but that's clearly a Jewish, not exclusively, but it's certainly a Jewish form.
Kafka speaks of himself, he speaks of his work as potentially having, potentially constituting a new Kabbalah.
It's and
in the diaries.
And Sholem says more forcefully than the way Philip put it that Kafka, if you want to know what Kabbalah is, read Kafka, because that's Kabbalah. That's Kabbalah. So he sees him as continuing the tradition. What I tried to do in Burnt Books was to show that by paralleling Kafka and Nachman's tales, that they both were essentially, you could say that Kafka was a reincarnation of Nachman, but for a secular world that wouldn't have understood Nachman in the terms that he presented his work.
As I said, I can't recommend that book highly enough. So
yes, you can.
But I will. Getting off on another subject, I think pastrami sandwiches are also Jewish. and
totally.
I know Rodger has a poem about pastrami sandwich. I mean, it's also a culture. It's not just a religion. The culture, civilization may have been first.
Right. Well, I think the food is really important, and I really do. It gives you a taste. It is a certain taste, right? That I sense. Jane's my sister. I could sort of feel it. That poem was like.
Jane, you also have the humor. That humor that you mentioned that you have in your poem.
Well, I think we all do, and that's another piece of it. And sometimes I wonder. I'm not as attuned to the general poetry world that maybe it's Jane and Alan are, but I wonder if that humor is always understood in a context where people sometimes think poetry should be, I don't know, serious.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely it's way too serious, too bardic, too not irreverent enough. But that's I'm absolutely.
You've run across that.
I agree with you more. Yeah. Oh, all the time. It's one of the reasons why I retired.
Well, long life to you in retirement, then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any other questions or comments? If anyone wants to throw something in there.
Yes, good evening. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I don't have a video today. My name is Ina, and Baruch, he's invited me. I'm third time on this reading. I am not a Jewish, which is not a fact because I'm from Ukraine and my last name very Jewish, and my grandfather very much looked like this gentleman who is now on my screen, appeared with the beard and the glasses. So, but anyway, I would love to say thank you very much for sharing this amazing, emotional, personal poems that contain a story of your family, of a tragedy, of happiness and everything. The way you put it, I am not so familiar with all these abbreviatures, and I'm learning. I'm trying to do my podcast, and I feel that you are wonderful people to learn from. And also, since I'm from Ukraine, I moved to the United States in 2016, but last time I was there before pandemic in 2019. And when I hear your stories and when I hear all these emotional and dramatic events that you've been going through, and through your parents and grandparents' ancestries, it helped me actually, it reminds me actually about my grandparents. My grandma, she passed away last year, but they went through World War II, They went through this starvation period. It was so hard. And when I listened to all of your poems, I immediately going back to all those stories when I was a little girl and my grandparents was telling me, and like goosebumps just all over my body. And it's so fulfilling. It's amazing. And thank you so much. Also, I have one little question, and it's for everyone. Maybe someone have something to suggest to me. How can I stay focused when I'm writing on my story, yet do not make it very much about me and make it interesting for people to read or be part of it? How to stay true to the story, yet make it not really selfish or all about me. How would you remain in that line frames? In that frames. Thank you very much.
Any of our poets wish to take that on?
Well, I guess I would say that William Carlos Williams says that contact with the local is the road to the universal, and so I wouldn't. I don't think you can write about yourself without it being self-absorbed. If you can write about yourself in such a way that it's about the self, and not. I wouldn't shun away from personal detail first. I would try to tell the story as powerfully and with as much particular detail as I could, and trust that if my interest in it is to figure something out, then that'll communicate itself to someone else.
All right, that sounds like great advice.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ina, for that question.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
A tough question. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, so Baruch and I are gonna huddle up for our next year's incredible season, but I don't think there's a better way we could have ended this one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Jane.
Great. Yeah, thank you, guys. It was great to hear.
Thank you, Rodger.
Katie, if you're still here, thank you so much.
A privilege to be here. So thank you all.
Yeah, I want to give Katie a shout out because without her, this wouldn't be happening, and she'll email everybody with the links to the YouTube version of this.
Great.
So you'll have it forever, however long YouTube lasts. Maybe not as long as Dianu, but perhaps perhaps as long as we wish. So thank you so much. Remember to check out their books and their websites of Baruch. Not Baruch too, but also Rodger and Alan and Jane. Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Sure.
I echo Phil's thankfulness, and it was a real pleasure to hear all of your poetry. And I also thank the JCC of Buffalo for creating a platform for us to deliver these wonderful voices to where they deserve to be heard. And I look forward to the future.
All right.
All right. Optimistic note.
Time to have dinner. Thank you. Time to eat that wonderful food. I'm going to make myself a pastrami sandwich.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Shalom.
Shalom.